Hey, what's up, everybody? Joshua Casper back at you with Plug-in Boutique, and I'm very excited for the sixth entry into our remote podcast series where we talk to music producers, film composers, and much more. And I'm very excited to be talking with Sebastian Arocha Morton. He is a Grammy-nominated film composer and music producer, and we're very excited to have him with us. So without further ado, let's bring Sebastian onto the podcast. Sebastian, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
How are you, sir?
Good. How are you guys?
Oh, can't complain. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Brazil. How about over there?
Oh man, that sounds amazing. Yeah, it's pretty nice here, I gotta say.
Nice. That's good. Where are you?
I'm in Burbank, California, so right in LA.
Oh, right in the heart of it, huh?
Right in the heart of it. They call it the media capital.
That's it. And you're the captain, right?
Yeah, I wish.
Well, if you want, why don't you just go ahead and give yourself a brief introduction so the people know who you are and what you're about, and then we'll just go ahead and jump into geeking out about gear, composition, and production, and so forth.
Sounds good to me. I'm a music producer, film composer, songwriter, all kinds of things. I've worked on a range of things, usually work more in the electronic world, so I've worked with um, people from Home Records, Roger Sanchez, Samantha James, Donna Summer, Seal, Sting. Worked on Iron Man 2, worked on several Marvel films, and yeah, usually all kinds of electronic music genre inspired things really is what I kind of specialize in.
Yeah, I mean, very cool. You've got a pretty stacked Wikipedia page, if I do say so myself. And it's all well deserved. It's 2 Grammy nominations at this point, isn't it?
Yes.
That's incredible, man. Congratulations.
Thanks.
I guess what I would like to do is kind of start briefly with music production for, like Mary J. Blige and Common, and then swing more towards film composition. As this whole month here on Plug-in Boutique, we've been talking to a number of trailer houses about scoring for trailers, and we've also been talking to another number of record producers who have like boatloads of music placements in film and stuff. So it's kind of been like a film, TV, game sort of month in terms of theme. So, but I don't want to gloss over the fact that, I mean, Donna Summer, Mary J. Blige, Common, these are just huge names. How does one even begin to start working with such talented stars as them?
Well, I mean, I think it was kind of a trajectory in terms of how I got into things because I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston, and then I made some really good friends there. And I already knew that I wanted to do, I studied film scoring and engineering and production. So I kind of knew, LA was definitely calling my name at that point.
Yeah.
A lot of my friends that graduated before me were coming here and getting cool jobs. So, I can't stress enough how connections early on in your life are such an important thing because my first job was to be a producer songwriter intern for a big pop composer. I mean, a producer composer. And that he kind of taught me the ropes. And from there, I started kind of co-writing, co-producing. It led to working with Santana. And it also led to, from there, I started kind of getting my own full-time gigs. And then I kind of moved out of his studio, opened up my own studio, signed to Universal as a songwriter. And from then, it was really more of like the network that we had, like everything going around in my life was pretty much DJ and electronic music oriented. So, like, I was working with, like I said, Santana. And then what happened there is that I started getting into remixing because I was working with so many DJs that as I started producing and writing songs, my tracks tended to be more dance floor oriented.
Mm-hmm.
So I started getting calls from labels to be like, hey, like one of my first remixes was for the Dandy Warhols. And then um, I did a remix for Duran Duran, which ended up being not used because something happened there. And the label, it was a huge disappointment because I'm a huge Duran Duran fan. And they had a falling out with the label, and then the track kind of existed there somewhere, but everybody loved the track. So I get a call from Capitol, and they're like, guess what? Sting wants to use the track. And,
What?
wow. Oh, I'm like, Duran Duran, these are all my heroes. So we ended up using the track that was unused, and then Sting came into the studio and sang one of his hit songs from Sacred Love on top of it. So it wasn't a remix, it was like a reproduction, like a modernized single reproduction of a Sting hit from Sacred Love. And then that started the ball rolling with Interscope, and that led to Common, Mary J, all that kind of stuff. So there is a linear trajectory between, like, one job kind of gets you the next job, etc. So to answer your question, I think it's very important to always put out your best, because I think, like, if I didn't do it because I wanted to get more jobs or get connections. I just wanted to do the best music possible. But I'm like, wow, if I would have fumbled that, then maybe it would have cost me all these gigs,
Yeah.
And then from those gigs, I met Victor Duplay, who is one of the Grammy nominations I have for our song. And so, you know, essentially, those remixes led to co-writing and producing with Victor, which led to the Grammy nomination. So everything is, it is kind of linear in that way.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people say you go to college not really about the classes, it's more about the relationships, the people you meet. If you're going to Berkeley, obviously it's one of the best in certainly in the US. And I mean, I can only imagine just the wealth of people. It's almost better just to be the cool guy and get all those friendships and get all those numbers. So after college is like when the fun really begins. I mean that's pretty fundamental. So I absolutely agree with you there. I also, I mean, you just said I started my first remix was for the Andy Warhol. I mean, that's pretty crazy, right? I mean, like, was that something you did on your own, or did someone reach out to you? Like, how did that come about?
Well, that wasn't my first remix. It was the one that led to my first remix. Is a funny story because I ended up my first remix was for a huge band from Mexico called Molotov, and they're really famous. They've got maybe 5 Grammys, multi-platinum records. They're amazing. I went to school with the drummer, and when I got to here, we kept in touch and all that. And he goes, "Dude, we got signed to Universal." This is when they first got signed. This is 1999. And he goes, "You got to check out my single." And at those times, you couldn't email anything. So he said, "Look, the record isn't out and the single is being pressed, but I'll send you the video." And I'm like, "Great." So I heard the video and I'm like, "This is amazing, man. It's going to be a huge hit." And I go, "Can I do a remix?" And he's like, "I don't know, man. I'm with Universal. Nobody knows you. I can't get you the parts, man." And I'm like, "Well, you know what? I'm just going to steal them from your video."
Nice.
So I literally took the audio from the video, and it was horrible. I mean, it was like VHS, and I had a little VHS thing. So I said, "Look, I don't even have the parts." So what I ended up doing was just high pass filtering it, kind of Beck, kind of Dust Brothers style, and then chopping it and then replaying it. And lo and behold, the producers for Molotov were Gustavo Santaolalla, who's got 2 Academy Awards, the guy that did Babel and Brokeback Mountain and all those. He's been a huge rock producer for a while. So I sent the track to my friend, and he's like, "Dude, this is actually kind of cool. I mean, it's funny, but it's really cool." And I'm like, "Have at it." And they ended up releasing it.
Oh, wow.
It was my first credit, which almost started almost as a prank. So I mean, so I already had a few things going, but the Dandy Warhols one was like my real big kind of like, they were a huge band,
Yeah.
huge cult following. And not only that, but they're really amazing. So, it's almost like saying, you're gonna do a remix for like not Radiohead level, but that level of where you're like, wow, this has to be nice. So
Right.
I think that the connection there was just that some of my previous work resonated with the guys at Capitol, and they were like, "Hey, let's send this over, see what he can do." So that's how it happened.
Yeah, I mean that's awesome. That's incredible, and that is a funny story that really panned out in the end, man. That's great. A comment that you made in the beginning there, you said, only put out your best. And how do you know when it's your best? Because I've released music in the past that I listen to now, and I'm like, no, like I want to be distanced from it. It's almost like it's time to change the name. You know what I mean? Like, how do you know when it's quote unquote the best, and it's something that you know that in the future, 10 years down the road, that you'll still want to be associated with? Like, is there is there some sort of secret sauce there that I'm missing? Like, because I've missed the mark 100% on
Oh,
that.
not you. We've all put stuff that we want to distance ourselves from. I think that's a good question. I think really it's about understanding. To me, I guess because I got thrown into the major label system from college, I didn't really. It's not like I started writing songs and producing demos and stuff like that. It's like I got thrown in with this producer called Casey Porter, who was already huge. He was doing Ricky Martin and he was doing Santana and stuff. And I was kind of, so to me, you got instant feedback. Like if your stuff wasn't cutting it, because basically, if I'm working for a guy who's already Grammy nominated and doing these huge projects, in essence, I have to sound at his level. Even if
Yeah.
I'm not even if I'm not him, I'm part of his team. So I really kind of studied and practiced. Okay, so what makes these drums smack? Why is his track loud? How come when I put a CD on, it's way louder than when I hear my mix that I did it at home? Things like that. So you start kind of comprehending mixing, mastering, song structure, simplicity, and you also start kind of buying the gear that goes with that. Now, I'm an old dude, so we're talking before plugins and all that. So I actually think kids now have it way easier than we did. Like when I got thrown in on this first big job with this producer, I mean, this guy had easily $1 million in his studio. I mean, I was paying rent. I could buy like one Quadra 650 Mac with like Pro Tools 4 on Audio Media. So what I ended up doing is I started renting equipment that he had. So because I wasn't his intern, so I didn't work at his studio 24/7 kind of sweating it out. I was kind of the the guy on his team that could make cool beats and cool synths and was a keyboard player since I went to Berkeley and all that. So it's kind of like whenever anything needed an edge, music was really going in that direction where Beck, um, artists, even in pop like Britney Spears and stuff, the Max Martin sound was coming in. So since we're back, and so young guys like me were kind of the synth guys, the cool effect for the older pop producers. And so what I did is like literally if I had to turn something in and I couldn't work at a studio, I would rent whatever piece of gear I thought was key in his studio. So like say if my job was, hey, we're working with this artist, she loves NSYNC's you know, Baby One More Time. So you listen to those drums and you're like, whoa, those drums are seriously compressed. And they just smack, they're killer. What do you use? So, you start I knew that at his studio he used Neve 1073s and he used an SSLG 384 compressor to really make stuff. So I couldn't buy those and I couldn't take his. So I would rent them. And, I would rent them on a Friday so that I had the whole weekend for one day. And I would just pass everything through them. And I really learned the ropes of like how to make things sound punchy and professional. So fast forward to today, it's kind of like having all these plugins that mimic this kind of stuff. It's like, I'm like, wow, it's incredible how difficult it was to, really learn these kinds of things. So going back to the question of how do you know when it's your best? I think that when it's your best when it really honestly sounds like artists you admire. It doesn't have to sound exactly the same. I mean, some people just have an incredible team of mixers and great mastering and just sick everything. But it should, like, it can't be a world of difference. So if you're making dance music and your kick does not sound like Calvin Harris's and your track is muddy and it's just like, it's almost not even in the same genre, that's how you know it's not there yet, Yeah. So I would just say, just like when you're learning an instrument, it's like your basis is, if you're learning a solo from like Steve Vai on the guitar, then your feedback is, wait, when I play it, it doesn't sound like him.
Yeah.
Same thing. It's like, always test your recording against like what you aspire to. And then just, it's really like being brutally honest.
Yeah. Having a good team around you, I think, or a good set of friends who aren't afraid to say, yeah, no, this isn't right yet, I think is another important thing. Because for me, like I just get clouded in it, and I'm like, well, I mean, it's got energy when I put it really loud, and I like that. But if I played it for a friend at Plug-in Boutique, they'd be like, nah, man, it's just not there yet. Or, you know what I mean? Just having that good team, and going to a school like Berkeley, you get that team just out of the gate. So I imagine that helps.
Kind of. Berkeley was very musical. So it was, it really was focused on like writing. And funny enough, like a lot of my professors, it was a time when like technology was still kind of like, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, type of situation. So they didn't push going into computers and stuff like that. They pushed like, sit on a piano and write the song, and if it doesn't work on the piano, then your song sucks, kind of mentality. You know what I'm saying? So it wasn't that I came out of Berkeley with a team knowing that stuff. It really was a situation where you were recording these demos and unlike now where it's kind of been equalized a little, because really anyone with a UAD set of plugins and a good DAW and a good like Apollo or something, their recordings are already at 60% in terms of how they're actually tracking. We were against the 1%ers, literally. Like if you were a kid that was trying to get a song to Britney Spears, you were against Max Martin and his $10 million studios. You were against David Frank. You were against like all these guys, because at the end of the day, they're going to put, who knows in what order the A&R is going to play it. Like if they play Max's song and then they play Dallas Austin's song and then they play your song, it probably sounded way worse. Just mix wise, I mean, it's just scientific. So there was a lot of like, whoa, there was a lot of inquiring, like, how do I make my recording sound professional? It was out of necessity. It wasn't even like, because I got a lot of feedback, like, yeah, your demo's kind of like, so.
So it sounds like you really had to do it all in a sense where, I mean, it seems like today, if I have a really good idea and my song slaps, okay, I've got the composition is right. I've got great vocals, but even if the mix is a little bit bad, I can just send that off to a mixing house or a mastering house to do that final sort of step where it hits right on whoever's listening on whatever speaker. But it sounds to me like you kind of had it where you had to do it all, or it wasn't going to work out.
Well, it's because everything cost so much money back then. Because
Right.
to send it, there was no sound better. There was no lander. There wasn't anything. I mean, if you got anyone, if you got anyone to mix it, at the very least, like even one of your buddies would cost you $300 at least. The big engineers, forget it. First of all, they wouldn't even take it. But if they did, it'd be a couple grand. So there was no middle ground. But I'll tell you one thing that it did teach me, which I actually still do to this day. And people are shocked when they come into the studio and they see how I work, because I basically have a huge stereo analog mastering rack where I pass almost all my stems through it while I'm actually tracking and making the song. And the reason is because when I had to go rent this equipment, that's what I did. I committed everything. And that's what people aren't doing right now. And that is that is, I think, what plugins and having so much access is actually hindering, which is the committing. Like people are going through like version 25, version 30 of tweaks. And the problem is that a lot of them don't even really have a goal in mind of how this is even supposed to sound. So you're going to get to version 100 and it might actually be worse than version 5.
Yeah.
Because you're not committing and you have way too many options. So I think that, at the end of the day, what really helped was that what made it hard was that I had to make a choice. I said, okay, I'm going to pass the drums as a stereo loop through the SSL underneath. So I got to dial in exactly how much low end I want and exactly how much high end, because there is no going back. And I would spend 2 hours on the drums alone. And then I would do that on the synths, and then I would do it on the bass. And then I also rented analog synths because I couldn't afford them. So I would bring in a mini Moog from SIR for $150 a day. And I said, okay, I've got $150, so all bass lines need to be done today.
Yeah, I would imagine.
It's like
Let's get.
there is no MIDI, man. It's like I'm turning this in tomorrow. So if it sucks, that's it. That's it.
Wow.
And it kind of puts you in the hot seat. It makes you really realize, like, okay, what do I want to do? Like, what is a good bass line? Like, I'm not going to do 11 takes and then be wondering. So again, you're like there kind of really grinding it out. And I think it helps tremendously. Like still today, I have plugins up and I use a lot of plugins, but I use them with the mentality that I'm going to commit. I'm going to use them as a piece of hardware.
Yeah. No, I get. I mean, that's when you said that, it makes a ton of sense. Having the nonlinear format when you can go back and tweak because maybe you want to roll off a little bit more of that bass on that synth, and that actually ends up ruining it. But you've listened to it so many times you don't even know anymore what it sounded like before, what it sounds like now in comparison. Like, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, and also a lot of great tutorial content online about bass specifically are people who are resampling, and they just go through, they record it, and they maybe have a their modulation wall, whatever have you, and they just record it and then go in and do more with that. Like, I think just doing it and getting it all of these possibilities and then going in maybe editing it later with the kind of mindset to not go back into the synth itself and like retweak one little parameter just to get something a little bit different, I think that's a really insightful bit of knowledge, man.
Thanks.
Thanks for that.
I mean, I'm not against going in and editing. I mean, I'm a lover of soft synths and plugins and all that. It's just that when I do it, I don't do it out of confusion or as an option. Meaning, like, I guess if I broke it down, I don't kind of do stuff where I'm like, this is okay, I'll fix it later. It's like I don't move on until if it's okay and I'm not loving it, then I kind of stay there. And yes, maybe a lot of viewers will be like, yeah, but dude, some of us are like under the gun and we got clients and we can't spend 2 hours on drums. I get that. My suggestion would be to kind of do it so much on the off time that if a client is in the room, then you don't really compromise on the quality. It's like you're like, okay, this might not be perfect for me, but it's not a fix it in the mix situation. The fix it in the mix situation is I think what's tripping up a lot of people right now, because it's a mentality where sometimes I get these sessions and there's like 250 plugins, and you're like, okay, but a lot of them are doing really redundant stuff, and a lot of them are actually hurting the sound. And so going back to putting out your best, it's like, I guess I always reference cooking. It's like when you see a really good chef, he doesn't like throw everything in the pot. It's like he just gets the best ingredients. So he'll be like, I'm going to use an organic tomato. I'm going to use organic basil. I'm going to use this incredible, this, that. I got my sauces, and then I'm going to make my dish, and I'm going to present the dish without you needing to throw a million sauces on it for it to taste good. That's how I feel. It's like, if you don't really know how to make a good bass sound or things like that, then my suggestion is maybe get one really good synth that has amazing bass. Start with the best, and then be like, and it's like start using, you know, really research out the plugins that really enhance the sound, and kind of limit yourself a little bit, just those plugins, not so that kind of approach.
Yeah, the less is more approach, essentially. Yeah.
You can have a ton of options. Like, I love plugins, but know when to stop kind of just throwing on chains.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
So what percentage are you these days, just in general? Obviously, every project is different, but between hardware and software, and maybe even more specifically between hard synths and soft synths, and then your compressors, your EQs, hardware or software. Are you balancing them pretty evenly, or are you still pretty much all hardware these days?
No, I mean, I've got a lot of both. Um, I would say almost like maybe 60-40 hardware, but just because I've been collecting it for a while. So, I always tell people, like I get a lot of questions like, so what should I buy? Should I just go all hardware and like buy a bunch of synths and stuff? And I'm like, if I was starting right now, I probably wouldn't buy half of the stuff I have. Like, a lot of it is just stuff that I've kept around because I love it and it's part of my workflow. So in terms of synths, I would say I own a lot of synths, but I probably use 60-40 hardware versus soft synths, things like that.
Well, obviously we're plug-in boutique, so we're quite happy with any mentions of plugins. What are some of your go-to soft synths when you're deciding to go in the box? You have any favorites? Are you more like sort of sample libraries and Contact? Or are you going for full-on phase plant serum type stuff?
Yeah, I mean, all of it, because especially working with film, it's like you just have to have a huge palette. I love, you know, I love all the stuff from Omnisphere, like the Spectrasonic stuff is useful. Um, I really like, the Arturia stuff is pretty good. I really like the soft tube stuff. I think they've been doing amazing stuff. I love the UAD. Soft synths as instruments. Yeah, I use Contact and a lot of Native Instruments. Um, Probably some of the British companies make my favorite stuff, like GeForce. And like, I love that Oscar and the Mini Monster, and they just did an Odyssey, and their Mellotron is fantastic. That company I've used for a long time. Yeah, lots. I mean, the thing is, I think it's important to have a lot of these things, even if you have hardware synths, because at the end of the day, especially for those, since we are also talking about film, in film, it's a whole different bag because there's a lot of, when I was talking about like having version 100 of stuff, it's more for records and it's more for singer songwriters and producers that are making recordings, because in film, there is always revisions, because it's not you, even if you are the artist or the composer, it's not your call. Meaning, there are, every single time I send out an MP3 with a cue or anything to be checked, the CC on it is at least 11 people.
Right.
So any one of them could be like, I don't know, that synth sounds a little 80s, or in a bad way. Or, I don't really like that synth. Can it be more analog? Hey, it's kind of muddy. Okay, it's not loud enough. It doesn't punch. So you're not going to be going back to your hardware every single time, because once you get this revision note, it's like they expected it yesterday. It's like they want a version 2 in 15 minutes, 20 minutes. So absolutely keep
Yeah.
as much as you can in the box.
I mean, you kind of seamlessly shifted to film composition, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
Uh, we were talking, as I said, we talked to some gentlemen from the High Finesse Trailer House and from Evolving Sound, and one of the biggest sort of comments they had about making music for trailers, and that was one of my questions for you about composing for film, is turnaround. Like when they get a revision, they're expected, like you said, to get it done. I mean, there's no time to be wasted. Like literally that day, whatever needs to be done, it has to be taken care of. And I was wondering if it was a little bit more slower or laid back when it's coming to like making an entire score for a film. Not obviously the entire score, but any particular piece of music. But I think you've said that you still have those quite quick turnaround calls.
Actually, a day seems way too lenient. No. There's degrees. There's degrees. First of all, you have to understand that music always gets the worst part of the filmmaking process for most, because you're in absolutely the last moment of post-production. You're the very last thing, and by this time, there's been a lot of problems with a lot of films, even great films. Like, even if the film is amazing and everybody's happy, they're always like, everything's amazing, make sure the composer doesn't mess it up.
Yeah.
So either way, you're in this kind of like, it doesn't matter if you're Hans Zimmer or anyone, there's always this like, okay, we're almost there, what's going on? I don't know. The theme, does it make it soft? So it's not that they send you revisions because you made mistakes. It's like, in order to be in the film, it's already assumed that you know what you're doing anyway. It's more like the revisions are them trying to figure out what they're hearing. So you have to be very careful. And that's why a lot of artists actually fail at being in film, like a lot of famous artists, because their egos can't handle it. And you'll hear this from the artists themselves. They're like, "Oh my gosh, film is a nightmare. Forget it." It's like, because a lot of artists believe that what they do is their stamp. So
Right.
it's take it or leave it. Meaning, oh no, don't go changing my sound. You want me because I am the greatest. Da da. And that doesn't work in film. It might work if like they just know that hit song is perfect, so they license the song and bop. But when you're working on the score, you have to figure out what they're thinking. Um, and it might be like, like somebody says, okay, this scene needs dark industrial mayhem analog, uh, just, I want it to be horribly eerie. To me, that sounds like Trent Reznor, like Nine Inch Nails meets Fugazi, something kind of really distorted, put the whole mix through the culture vulture and filter it, just make it cool. But maybe to them, it's actually like really dark strings that are dissonant, and then you hear like a vocal that's super distorted.
So when they send you that, are you getting a written description? Are they sending artwork? Are they sending a cut of some of the film itself? Like, what are they giving you to get started? And then maybe when they come back with revisions, are you getting more visual information and sort of feedback that way? Or is it all just email chains where they're like, nah, this isn't dark enough, and dark could be interpreted in so many ways? Like, what are they
Well,
giving you?
most films are temped. That means a temp track or temporary track. So at the beginning, before you even get hired, just while they're showing the cuts to the producers, sorry, and everybody, just to see the progress of the film. Watching films with no music is very weird.
Yeah.
A lot of people haven't experienced it because any film that's commercially available, most, unless it's for a specific reason to actually make you uncomfortable, most films have music. So they have to put in a temporary track, which is usually just the editor throwing in some of their favorite soundtracks that they think might work or have worked in the past under this. So, if there's a love scene, maybe they'll put in a beautiful string passage from, a famous movie where it was just great. Or if, if it's a cool kind of techie thing, they'll throw in the Social Network soundtrack. So there's something there that kind of sets the color of what they were thinking. The problem is that a lot of times they send you this and then there's a track underneath it. And then the first thing they say is, oh, we don't like it.
Fantastic.
So you're like, why'd you put it there, right? Of course you don't say that. But so then you're fighting two fronts, because what if it actually does work, but they don't like it? Do they really not like it? Or are they just trying to be cooler than the Social Network? So they're like, don't sound like the Social Network.
Right.
So there's so many psychological sides where you have to decipher. So to answer your question, you get it. You also usually get what they call, spotting notes, where you sit in a room with the music supervisor, the director, the producers, and you all discuss, okay, on this scene, we'll use this song. On this scene, it's score. What we want to do in this scene is make sure that you feel his loneliness, or this guy needs to be scared to death, or this. So you get a description and you get the temp track, and then you have to kind of decipher from conversations. Okay, so this should be organic. This should be played by the orchestra, or this should be more electronic, and it should have like some really messed up modulating, detuning synths, blah, blah, blah. Also, sometimes you get hired because they say, okay, I want this to be very electronic. That's why we're hiring you. And that helps, because then you're like, great. So I can sound more like myself. I can sound more like what I sent them to get this film. And that's always helpful,
Oh, for
Yes.
sure. I have just a quick question about vocab as we're moving forward here, for people listening and tuning in. Can you walk me through the differences, or if there are any, between a theme, a cue, a score, when you're talking specifically about film? Are there any differences there, or maybe some other lingo that I haven't brought up that you might be able to cue us in on?
Definitely. So the score is everything. The score is the soundtrack per se, minus the songs. So there's the score and the songs. So when you get into it, like when you first, like if you get the awesome call from your agent or whatever, and they're like, you got the film. First thing that happens is you probably take a meeting with 3 people, which are key. 4 people. The editor of the film, the music supervisor, which usually gets hired before the composer, the director, and maybe a producer or a showrunner if it depends on film or TV. And what happens is that at that moment you watch the film without music or with the temporary music that's there. They go through it and they basically give you what they like so far from the temporary music, what they don't like, what they wish they had, and what the absolute vision they have is for the end. And then from that discussion, your music editor who works with you, that is also at that meeting, which is the editor for you, meaning the guy that's putting the music into the film for them to check out. He's taking notes in what we call spotting notes, taking down everything, what the director said, like, this is too soft. I don't like the temp music because it makes it cheesy. Noted. Don't use synths, use real piano strings. Noted. Those are called cues. So say like you're a minute into the film and somebody dies and the music starts, that's cue 1M1, which means reel 1, music cue 1. And all movies are divided into reels. So by the end of the movie, it's probably 6 or 7 reels for 2 hours. So by the end of the movie, so say there's 20 cues, which means 20 pieces that the composer creates from scratch, original music. By the end, it might be 6M25, which means reel 6, music cue 25. And they can be any length. Some cues are 7 minutes, some cues are 5 seconds. It depends. That's all determined at these spotting sessions. And themes are, sometimes they're not even done by the composer. Like if you watch The Simpsons, Alf Clausen does the score week to week, but Danny Elfman did the theme. So the theme sometimes is like, okay, this is the motif. This is the John Williams, Indiana Jones thing. From this theme, you can compose it or someone else can compose it. That depends. Sometimes you end up using pieces of that theme as your score. So if you listen to Star Wars or you listen to Indiana Jones, you'll hear like da 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 in different transpositions throughout the thing. So he's taking his theme to use for cues. And so that entails the score of the film. And then the soundtrack of the film is your score plus what the music supervisor added as licensed songs.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah. And
that's
that
cool.
Together brings out all the music in the film.
And just while we're continuing on vocab here, I was looking at some of your credits on some of your films, and I do want you to let us know on some of the projects you've worked on. But I mean, I've seen songwriter, composer, producer, guest music producer, score producer, musical director. You seem to be wearing quite a few hats. How many of those are essentially the same thing, or are all of those completely defined roles within the production of making music for film?
I think that everything has kind of come full circle to, like, a perfect example is my good friend Marius de Vries, who is executive music producer for La La Land, among other things. Executive music producer is a new term because there's so many hats. It kind of means sometimes you're not the composer, meaning you're not the music by blah, blah, blah. But you are writing songs that end up being the song that is at the end, So sometimes, for example, I did a movie called Alex Cross with John Debney was the main producer, was the main director. I mean, the main composer. But so I ended up producing songs that were placed in the movie. So I was, as Roca Sound, I was an artist, an electronic artist, where the music supervisor placed my song as me, the artist. I also wrote score, as co-composer, and then we brought in Joe Perry, from Aerosmith, and he ended up, we ended up writing the main theme and song, you know? So that ended up being, I produced songs, I produced score, and that happened with Iron Man 2, that happened with Draft Day, it happened on a lot of different things. So at the end of the day, your credits are sound designer, musician, songwriter, sometimes coach to the pop artist singing at the end, record producer for the song at the end, mixing engineer, synth programmer, orchestrator. It's crazy.
Are
So,
all those billable? Are you getting a new stack up on the invoice every time they add a new credit like that to your?
you know what? We're gonna have a different conversation about that. So at the end of the day, yeah. So it's become executive music producer, which makes perfect sense because I always say, like, I got into film as a music producer, and I got in by producing film composers, which sounds really weird, but it's not, because if you think about it, the ages of, like, artists being composers, like the times of artists being composers, are pretty recent, meaning like Junkie XL, Trent Reznor, Johnny Greenwood. It's like they haven't been around for 50, 60 years. They've been in the past maybe 10, 15 years, been like, oh, we're seeking an artist because we want the score to sound like a Phoenix record, or like like an Air record or whatever. That's pretty recent. What happened before is that you would have great orchestral composers, but they were very limited because they never grew up producing records, and they definitely didn't grow up in the DJ electronic world. So, if you but they make such amazing emotional music. So what ended up happening around 2008, 2009 is that they would pair artists with established amazing orchestral film composers. Like for The Matrix, it was Juno Reactor with Don Davis. Even when Junkie XL got in, it was like, I think it was Man of Steel.
And Hans Zimmer, right?
Junkie.
Yeah.
I was paired up a lot with this composer called John Debney, who's incredible, because our sensibilities just kind of tied in. It wasn't that he said, like, I handle orchestra, you handle synths and awesome, like, distorted beats and stuff. It was more like, this has to sound like one sound, but I want it to be more modern. So how about, if you write, then you write the electronic parts, but also incorporate the orchestral side. And when I write the orchestral side, I'm also going to do electronic and beats and stuff to show you what I'm feeling this should do. And then it ends up being a full partnership where, like, you really go in there, and it's like, the first thing you need to do is make sure that the music serves the film. And then the second thing is make sure that it does sound updated, cool, punchy, well produced. And I think that that's really helped scores nowadays, because I feel like scores, if you listen to a score on its own, it just sounds like a cool record. Whereas before, it always kind of sounded a little just like a classical music album.
Yeah. 100% agree with you. I mean, I think the first time I noticed a music producer on a soundtrack was Trent Reznor on The Social Network. And I thought it really set the tone of the film, and that just kind of got me interested way back then. I don't even remember what year that was, but I mean, I think marrying, like you said, you've got the kind of classical film composer married with a modern producer who's using the technology instead of just orchestral, and then marrying those two things. Like, it's really made its own genre at this point. I believe it's called like epic music on Spotify. It's just like
Yeah.
where you can listen to it, and it's not like I'm listening to my grandfather's classical records. It sounds like I'm listening to this emotional, big, massive sound that can just go
Yeah.
anywhere. Yeah.
Let me clarify something about that, though. It's kind of a misconception which I hear a lot, which is that when we're talking about that type of pairing, what a lot of people think is that basically, you know, you're coming in as a ghostwriter, and the main composer doesn't really know how to do anything cool, and he's taking credits for all the cool stuff, and you're basically like an assistant, you know. And that's a really bad misconception as to how the pairings actually are. Even if somebody isn't, even if it doesn't say like music by somebody and it just has one composer's name, and it might say additional music, which means that you also wrote a lot of the score, but there's one composer that has their name in the credits. It doesn't mean that like I got shafted and like I did all the cool stuff and he's taking all the credit. You would have to like really see the process of how it is, because that's kind of like a producer claiming, that's like saying that when Max Martin did the Britney Spears records, or like, you know, when Madonna records come out, like she wasn't really the artist because, you know, Max Martin played all the instruments and he made sure everything sounded amazing and maybe even tuned her here and there. So it's not really a Britney Spears record. You know, I mean, that's ridiculous when you hear it in the record world. It's ridiculous in the film world too, because there's a lot of teamwork. And just because somebody doesn't get billed like Hans Zimmer and Junkie XL, like as music by, it doesn't mean that like, you know, what you did was on an assisting or like ghostwriting level. Because a lot of the time what happens is that you're there literally as a music producer for film music. So you just make sure the strings are cooler. That they're more distorted. They're more in your face. You know, you make sure that the beats are at the level of a record and not just something from Contact or one of these, you know, libraries. So I think it's a little unfair out there because a lot of people are, you know, a lot of people don't really understand how the marriage happens. You know, it literally is us producing the film composer. Whatever that would be for an artist, it's happening for film composers.
Gotcha. Well, noted. And now
Yeah.
everybody watching knows it too. Very
I think
cool.
it's important for young guys because I feel like a lot of them, you know, I don't want them to feel like they're something is beneath them or they're getting the short end of the stick. Like it's an honor to be a team member too.
Oh, for
You know?
sure.
You
Yeah.
do really cool stuff. It's not just about the main billing.
Yeah. Um, yeah. What are, if you want to just go ahead and let me know some of the bigger projects that you've worked on? Obviously, I've seen, but just for the people watching that might not know, what are some of the films that you've worked on in the past?
I worked on Iron Man 2. I worked on Draft Day. I worked on uh, this awesome movie called Americana. I worked on Elysium. I worked on several TV shows too that were big. I worked on Young Sheldon on CBS. I worked on Game of Silence, American Odyssey. I worked on several EA video games. I did 2 Madden games. I'm working on one right now that I can't really disclose, but it's very, very cool, and the Europeans are going to love it. Let's just say it has to do with the World Cup. And I've worked on several Marvel worldwide installations in all the Disney parks.
Little Miss Sunshine.
Sorry, what?
Little Miss Sunshine, no?
Little Miss Sunshine. Yeah, I forget, man. It's like There are so many. Um, yeah.
The
So,
Grammy though, you got to remember the Grammy one.
right. And yeah, that was cool too. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, so it's really been all over the place. And
Well, let me just.
right now, I'm also working on a very cool film that doesn't have a name yet, but it's by the producers of Slumdog Millionaire.
Oh,
Yeah, and it's an incredible dark thriller, which
oh
should
wow.
be. It got kind of, it got delayed with COVID and all that, but it's gonna be hopefully out end of this year or maybe beginnings of next year.
So you said you worked on Madden and some other titles there. From most of the people that I've talked to, usually if they've had any sort of music in video games, it's always a placement of, just a regularly produced track. Is that what you have involved with
No,
Madden too? So
no,
what exactly in Madden needs a score? Like the menus, or what's going on there?
no. There's a lot, at least in the uh, in the latest ones. There's a lot of emotional music because there's a lot of stories that are behind the scenes, like the coach. It's like if you see them in the locker room and he's like, this is, we got to win this, blah, blah, blah. There's literally a score that sounds like Rudy or something behind. Like we use full orchestra,
Oh
like,
wow.
like the Madden long shot, the one that I did, we did Abbey Road, like 100 players. Like it's no joke. It's full on, um, full, like a total film score. Nothing is different. And what you get is, I guess people that play the game don't really see this, but we see the actors with their wires and green scene behind them and the green screen and all that.
And that's what you
So
write to?
that's what we write to.
That's awesome.
Yeah, because they're doing, the graphics take so long
Yeah.
that sometimes they need to lock down the tempo of certain things. So if there's like the big game and they're like, this has to be at 120 because we're going to cut to 120, then they need the music before they finish the graphics. So you still see some of its graphics, and then you see an actor, all wired up in this crazy alien suit. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about doing the more involved scoring for video games where the sound has to evolve with different scenes? Like if you turn the corner and it's a bad guy, then things get tense, the music changes, or is it more you're just, like you said, doing a full orchestral piece for a specific scene that is essentially it's a movie but with CG characters?
I did something like that for the Minions. I did the Minions video game. And even though it's not dark like that, it did escalate with different choices. Like, it's all about how it's a hilarious game. It's like super weird and twisted, but depending on what mayhem they're causing or what you do to get the different levels, the tempo increases, things go wrong, and you're scoring to that. But that happens in Madden too. I mean, you definitely, you're definitely changing tempo with how the game goes. So sometimes if you lose, that cuts to a scene. You're playing to the, like, oh, this is like defeat music, or
Right.
stuff. So yeah, it's like that too.
Yeah, you'll have to forgive me. I haven't played Madden in years, even though I'd like to. I just have no time these days.
Yeah, I hear you. It's evolved. It's evolved for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen clips on YouTube and on Twitch where, I mean, it's like you're watching at this point. It's like you're watching a real game anyway. It's just insane. So, excuse my ignorance on the topic there, but I mean, that is really cool. I was just wondering what the differences were on how you organize your project, because the escalation in the music can really happen at any time if you're in a game like probably the Minions game, which is another game I haven't played, unfortunately. But there is just, you're not going to score and be like, at 2 minutes in, we have to get more intense. It's like when the player reaches X position, then the music needs to change. And I was wondering how cued in you need to be about the transition, like what kind of guidance are you given between going from a kind of more mellow cue, I guess, into a more intense cue? And like, do you need to make the transition? Is that done by somebody else, or?
What you do is you do kind of alternate versions. So I do a lot of that, but sometimes it's more of an editing thing where they have so many options for different options from the player. So really you just create, like, sometimes, like we joked that sometimes video games are like scoring 4 movies or 8 movies, because you're basically doing, the main score, then the faster score, then the slower score, then the more, you know, score minus certain elements, blah, blah, blah. And what ends up happening is that a lot of things just get fused at the end. And then you're just kind of there doing band-aid kind of stuff. Like, okay, that might be too abrupt if, you do kind of cross that door and suddenly it's like 20 BPM more. So you create ramp versions. You create kind of what you call bridge cues or segue cues, where one starts and then kind of ramps up into a certain tempo or a certain color, or decreases depending on what the option of the player was. But they have it's a lot of different things. The main difference between video games and film or TV is that you do it modular. So you work on different sections, and you don't necessarily tee up the next section, or there's not a lot of like reveal things, because it's more like a needle drop kind of a cue. So you don't watch it and go like, oh, okay, he's going through the door at second 56, boom. So, and in film, it's a lot of that, like you really kind of hit things.
While we're talking about differences between different mediums here, what are the main differences between composing for a project that is aimed for television as opposed to the big screen? If there are any, of course.
Not really, no. I mean, I think are you talking about both of them being movies, or one of them being a TV show and one of them being a movie?
Well, exactly. On time-wise, if you sign on to a TV, like, are you on it for the season? Like, what's, just what are the differences when you get these different projects between
Usually when you sign on for a TV show, you do the pilot, and unless they just didn't like it, or they thought they could do better than your pilot, then if the show gets picked up, you might get replaced. You can always get replaced. It doesn't matter anywhere. I mean, you don't hear of a lot of stories of people being replaced, but people get replaced all the time. And it's not an ego thing. It's just kind of like, maybe they were too expensive. Maybe, it wasn't the sound they wanted. There's a lot of things. I think the big difference in TV is that you actually do outs for commercials, where you do not do that in film. So, a lot of times, especially in drama things, like, I did like American Odyssey for NBC and Game of Silence. They both had like really intense dark scenes, and so like somebody was escaping from prison and running for their lives. So but there's a commercial right after that, right? Because they want to leave you hanging. So literally, like, they're chasing them and you're ramping up the drums, and it's getting like full on epic with the strings and the spiccatos and all this. And then, it's like you're coming out. So you do the full riser, everybody's heard it, where it's like, and you kind of hit it right before the black, and then it cuts to commercials. So that's very specific for TV.
That's kind of like almost like a trailer type.
Yeah. Very trailer.
So yeah, man, I mean, we're coming up on an hour here. I don't want to take up too much of your time. It's been an absolute blast, absolute pleasure to talk to you. Thanks, and you've taught me some things along the way, and hopefully some of the people watching too. So I just want to extend my gratitude for stopping by. And if maybe we'll do it again in the future after your next few projects drop, and you want to let us know what's been going on with those. I know it's all secret, and this last year hasn't been too eventful for many people, especially people in film, obviously.
It's been busy. It's just not things just got delayed. So yes, look out for a couple things late this year or early next year.
Where can people kind of follow along with you? And do you post anywhere that you've released something, or have you been involved in something? Is there anywhere people can kind of watch what you're doing?
I always post on my website, rockasound.com.
Oh.
And I also post on Instagram quite a bit. Like just what kind of synths I use and so it's instagram.com/rockasound. Yeah, that's the two main things I use.
Okay, well, we'll make sure to post those in the chat and post those in the video description. But man, thanks again, Sebastian, for stopping by and taking time out of your busy day to let us know what's going on behind the scenes, man.
No problem. My pleasure, man. Thank you for having me.
Hopefully talk to you again soon, all right?
Yeah,
bye-bye.
Thanks.
And I believe we would have cut by now. If you want to, you can go ahead, man. I won't hold on. Oh, you don't need to be online for the rest of it.
Oh, good, man. That was
Thanks
fun.
again, though. Yeah, it was a blast, man. I mean, we had quite a few people watching.
Cool.
People loved all the knowledge that you dropped on us, man. So thanks again.
Oh, thank you, man.
All right, dude. Ciao.
Yeah.